Hello, sorry, we can hear you. Can you confirm who's speaking? Yep, nice and clear, thank you. Okay. Mr. Nichols, can I just check we can hear you, please? Yep, nice and clear, thank you. Evening, Councillor Hinder. Can I just check that we can hear you, please? Okay, we can hear you nice and clear at the moment. Thanks.
Right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, councillors. I'm Councillor Dennis Spooner, and I'm Chairman of the Maidstone Borough Council Planning Committee, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this meeting. Before we commence proceedings, may I take this opportunity to advise you that if the fire alarm does sound, please remain seated, and members of the Democratic Services team will assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building if necessary. Tonight's proceedings will, as usual, be webcast by the Council, but if anyone else is intending to record these proceedings, can you please let me know now? I ask this question not to stop you, but merely to ensure that members and other members of the public in the room know that this is taking place. Nobody is indicating, so I will take that as a no. I would like to advise members that they should only address the meeting by way of the microphones and to remind them to turn their microphone off when they have finished speaking. We now come to item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies for absence. I have received apologies from Councillor Cox. I can see there are nobody else who is not here. Okay. Notification of substitute members. Councillor?
Councillor Mortimer, Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Councillor Mortimer. That is duly noted. Notification of visiting members. I understand that Councillor Garton wishes to speak on agenda item 12, and he will be doing that virtually. Yeah. And I understand Councillor Hinder wishes to speak on agenda item 14, and he will also be doing that virtually.
Correct, Chair.
Hello? Didn't quite catch that.
Is it correct? Just affirming.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Hinder. Thank you. Item 4, items withdrawn from the agenda. There are no items withdrawn from the agenda for this evening. Item 5, urgent items. I intend to take verbal updates in the officer presentations as urgent items as they contain further information relating to the application to be considered at this meeting. Item number 6, are there any disclosures by members and officers? Councillor Brindle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to declare item 14. At the time this was discussed, I was a member of the Environment Committee of Boxley Parish Council, so therefore I'm predetermined and cannot take part in the discussion tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Brindle. That is duly noted. Are there any other disclosures from any other councillors or officers? Thank you.
Items numbers 12 and 14.
Thank you, Councillor Mumford. Councillor English.
None at all.
Councillor Mortimer.
Item 12 only.
Yeah, 12 and 14.
Councillor Harwood. Thank you. And Councillor Coates?
None, sir.
Thank you. Councillor Forecast? 12 and 14. Councillor Eaves?
12 and 14.
Councillor Perry?
Items 12 and 13.
Councillor Brindle?
Items 12 and 15.
Items 12 and 14.
You and I have been lobbied on on item 12. Item number 8, to consider whether any item should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. I move that the items on the agenda be taken in public as proposed. Is that agreed? Thank you, councillors. Item 9, minutes of our last meeting. I move that the minutes of the meeting held on 26th of August be approved as a correct record and signed. Is that agreed? Thank you, members. There are no petitions this evening. Agenda item 11, deferred items. I call upon Mr. Bailey to update us on deferred items. Thank you.
I've got nothing further to add on the updated items, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. In that case, we then move on to item 12 on the agenda, which is our first application, and it is, I think it's on page 10 of our agenda, relating to Woodside, Furs Lane, Hollingbourne, and I'll call upon Mr. Bailey to present his report to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just got some items to update before I go into the presentation, and I'll share my screen then. Received a new objection letter subsequent to which couldn't come into time in terms of the urgent update reports. This effectively reiterates some issues that have previously been set out in your reports, but I'll just try and summarise them if I can. The plans that have been submitted do not reflect the current position and are therefore inaccurate. Previous application for the development of 3 houses was rejected last year, and it was stated that this inappropriate development of garden land would represent poor design and would neither maintain nor enhance local distinctiveness. The amended plans in terms of the withdrawal of the garages in place of the parking spaces do not preclude these being built in the future. Also previously documented concerns regarding increase in traffic. In terms of the Forestry Commission have stated that although they have issued a restocking notice to replant 77 trees to date, this has not been addressed, and the plot is far more suited to 2 larger properties and to be in keeping with other dwellings in the lane. I've also got sort of a correction to make in terms of paragraphs 8.1 of the report, where it refers to 6.1 years worth of housing land supply, 1st of April 2020. Members will know at SPI on Tuesday night, the updated housing land supply position was presented to members of that committee, and that effectively said that the council had 5.6 years of supply as of the 1st of April 2021, with no impacts on the buffer or the housing delivery test requirements. So the housing position remains strong. It's just a correction on paragraph 8.1. And then if I could just very briefly, because I'm not going to go into detail in terms of the restocking notice, if I could just draw members' attention to the information on page 14 of the report, which details the background information to the site, sets out Forestry Commission's latest comments, and in terms of that the restocking notice does not prevent members making a decision on the application tonight, and notwithstanding what decision is made, the restocking notice or any subsequent enforcement notice has no bearing on the decision made under the terms of the Planning Act. As I said, as is generally known, we don't interfere with other legislation. We make a decision in accordance with the Town and Country Planning Act, and we don't deal with the Forestry Act under 1967, so that's a separate piece of legislation. So you'll just have to sort of acknowledge that that's there, but that shouldn't influence your decision tonight. So I'm just going to turn to the application. I've just got to present my screen first. And it's luckily because I can actually say to members, can you see my screen? And you actually can see my screen. So, turning to the application, this is the application site. You have the A20, so it's located to the eastern side of Firs Lane, 100 metres, approximately 100 metres to the south of the junction with the A20. It is located within the countryside and also within the Len Valley landscape of local value. This is looking up the lane, looking northwards. And this is the road looking southwards. So there is a bit of an echo. I'm just going to, bear with me 1 minute. I'm just going to have to end the show because I think it's, is it? Can you turn it down? Okay. Right, I think we've resolved that matter. Okay, so this is looking southwards. This is the front of Woodside. This is looking to the rear of Woodside, looking east. The garage and the lean-to are not part of the application details, and that will become more evident as we move through the red line boundary of the application details. And this is the rear. So this is the application site in terms of the red, which shows the positioning of the 3 proposed dwellings. That is the garage that I've referred you to just earlier in terms of that photograph there. And you'll notice that's not part of the application. And then obviously you've got the wooded area down to the south, to which the report does refer to in terms of the additional tree surveys and the management of that site have come forward as part of the application details. So this is the block plan as laid out. The existing property is shown here in this dotted line with the 2 new properties shown here, and this is the land to the south, as I said, that's outside the red line boundary, but as I said, looks in terms of the management of the woodland as part of this application detail. Turning to the design of the units, this is the larger plot, so this is plot 1, so plot 1 situated here, and this is the front elevation, the rear, the 2 flanks. You've got ground floor accommodation here, and you've got first floor accommodation in this position here. Going to plots 2 and 3, which are plots 2 and 3, and these are the general design elements in terms of you've got slate roofing, horizontal boarding, you've got aluminium windows and facing brickwork with a ground floor plan and effectively a 3-bedroom property with a study room, so 3 or 4 bedroom property as shown. So this is the existing property Woodside. In terms of the landscape strategy detail, that is not the easiest to follow, and so I've got it in slightly more detail here, and it may be worth just going through some of the strategy details that are proposed in terms of mixed native hedging along to the side boundaries here, which is a double row. In terms of this area here, a 4-row mixed native hedgerow across this boundary. You can see native shrub planting across the boundaries here. Infill tree planting, native tree planting to the boundaries. And you've got some ornamental shrub planting to the front gardens of properties, and then mixed native hedgerow dividing the property boundaries, as you can see through here. And then in terms of the detail, and this is the sort of the management of the woodland that's sort of covered in the submission details and is set out in the condition detail in this sort of highlighted area. And in terms of it picks out the mix from the landscape character assessment and sort of picks out the details of planting. If members wish to go through that in further detail, I can sort of go through that as and when the discussion continues. So in terms of landscape strategy, then you've just got to look at the tree survey and constraints plan. Effectively, this goes to the southern part of the site. The tree retention and removal, so the protection of the existing trees. And as I said, this is outside the application site, but comes under the tree management details as submitted. And that's it. I might just to give members detail, it's just to give a sort of an overview looking at Google Earth. This is a 2020 photograph of the site, which just gives some context of the surrounding development. And in terms of, members will note the previous history on the site. There are a number of refusals for different forms of development. Admittedly, there were proposals for 2 houses in approximately this position here, which were extending deep into the site, which was refused, and also that proposal included an additional dwelling in this locality here. So, and those are set out on your papers. The officer justifies the acceptability of this scheme in terms of landscape character due to a number of factors, some of them being related in terms of the character of the dwellings that front onto the lane here, by not causing harm to the landscape character. I'll go through that in further detail, but it's just worth noting in terms of the wider context of the site. So the key issues to consider are set out in paragraph 7 of your reports and relate principally to the sustainability of the location, the visual impact, arboricultural matters, amenity, highway safety and biodiversity. I won't concentrate on the replanting notice set out by the Forestry Commission for the reasons I've set out earlier. So with regards to sustainability, given the conclusions reached of a previous inspector and for recent decisions for nearby properties, together with the access to alternative means of transport nearby the site, the location is not considered as unsustainable in this context, sufficient to warrant a refusal on this ground. The previous applications also were not refused on this ground either. With regard to landscape impact, whilst acknowledging the proposals extend built development further southwards, given the properties on the other side of Firs Lane, as just previously shown on the Google Earth map, their frontage form of development as proposed, as you can see on your screen in front of you, the retention of the spatial relationship between and around properties, which is similar to those surrounding the site, it is considered that the proposed units would not appear out of character or harmful to the landscape character, especially when considered against the landscape strategy submitted as part of the proposals. Matters relating to the design of the units are also considered acceptable. Regarding tree impacts, aside from matters relating to the restocking notice, as I've said earlier, which is outside the confines of the Planning Act, the proposed dwellings fall outside the root protection areas of trees to be retained and will not result in future pressure to remove additional trees. Members will note that there were grounds on the previous applications which cited development within the RPAs as being a specific ground of refusal. So to that context, this application has addressed those previous grounds. In terms of amenity to future occupiers and existing residents, with appropriate conditions, the proposals are not considered to result in amenity issues to existing and future residents. No concerns are raised with regards to highway impact, and suitable conditions can be imposed to ensure biodiversity enhancements within the fabric of buildings and on the surrounding land. The enhancements are set out in the preliminary ecological appraisal, and these are recommended to be conditioned as set out in the report. No impacts are considered to arise on the setting of the nearby listed building, and conditions are recommended to cover electric vehicle charging points, external lighting details, and renewable energies to be incorporated into the proposals. Other conditions are also set out in your report on pages 22 to 25. For these reasons, the proposals are considered acceptable and comply with the key policies of the development plan. And on that basis, the application is recommended for approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Before I proceed to ask our speakers to speak, I notice we've now been joined by Councillor Holmes, which raises two issues. Firstly, can I ask you if you have any disclosures to make in relation to the applications to be considered this evening?
Disclosures, no. Disclosures of lobbying, yes, on...
Okay, so you're saying you've been lobbied, but you haven't got any other disclosures to make. Thank you, Councillor Holmes. Which applications were you lobbied on? I didn't quite hear.
Item 12 and 14.
Thank you very much. Right, our first speaker is Miss Giles, who is an objector. If I could ask you to come up to the desk, and if you press a button, the middle button,
yep.
Your microphone will light up, and you have 3 minutes from when you press the button. Thank you.
So the other objectors and I are asking you to look into the application and what huge negative effects it will truly have. The application is completely dishonest and does not show the real impact these proposed properties will have on the existing dwellings. We have all asked for the application to be updated countless of times to show our current house plans, yet our outdated plans are still being used on the revised application. This is incredibly inaccurate and unjustified. We all feel we have not been listened to online. The committee report does not reflect any of the objectors' comments or concerns, and we feel we've not been treated fairly on this misleading application. My property is a small bungalow called Chestnuts, our first house and our forever home. We fell in love with it because of the rural area and the quiet lane. Now there's a potential that we'll be totally overlooked by a two-storey property built directly opposite us. Habitable rooms facing each other and a huge loss of privacy for both our front bedrooms, which will be in direct view from plot 2. To make matters worse, they've placed a driveway right outside of our main bedroom window. We have measured the lane and it's only 2.8 metres wide. Our house sits directly on the lane and not set back like other existing properties. Imagine having car headlights beaming into your bedroom, car noise, cars manoeuvring directly outside your bedroom at such a close proximity of 2.8 metres. The case officer called this some nuisance. I hugely disagree. This is an appalling design fault and is life-affecting when it comes to enjoyment of our own property, the basic need of a good night's sleep, mental health and healthy well-being, and specifically when it comes to extending our family, as the other bedroom will also be affected, triggering even more emotional stress. This is not some nuisance. No one would want that directly outside of their bedroom window. I also note on the report the proposed dwelling, plot 2, would look between chestnuts and conifers, and its mass is not considered harmful. Again, this is incorrect, as we have both extended our properties. There is no room for the proposed property to sit or look between our properties. This comment is incredibly inaccurate, and it would be in fact very harmful, as it would be sitting directly opposite and overlooking both existing dwellings. The plot has already had an application for 3 properties rejected. Nothing the council recommends has been put in place, so to see this application get approved would be contradicting to last points of rejection. This latest application is again for 3 houses, but now compacted to even smaller area, which is not in keeping with the lane. The plot was illegally felled prior to the first planning application, and there is a restock notice to replant 77 trees on this land. This does not show in the landscape plans, nor has it been addressed. We urge you to consider whether approval of this application is worth the harm and risk to biodiversity, woodland, and the beautiful rural area that we are also fortunate to have on our doorsteps. Thank you for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to speak this evening. I live in Furs Lane, so I could go through the fallacies and misinformation in this very, very slick application, including those highlighted in the most recent response from the Forestry Commission. I could outline the ethical concerns of granting planning on woodland, which is illegally felled, or the frankly preposterous claim that a housing development will improve biodiversity over established countryside woodland, which is a key buffer between the town and Junction 8. However, I'm not going to highlight those. Instead, I will draw your attention to the comments and responses from yourselves as a council and other government bodies against this application. Less than a year ago, Maidstone Planning made the following comments when rejecting an application for a smaller development of 2 houses on this site. They said, development would consolidate sporadic and urbanising development in rural landscape, causing unacceptable harm to character and appearance of area. This inappropriate development of garden land would represent poor design and would neither maintain nor enhance local distinctiveness of countryside hereabouts that falls in the Len Valley. Tell me, how is this no longer true? Maidstone Borough Council's local plan, policies DM5 and DM11, specifically exclude garden land in countryside locations. But this is not just countryside. Your report will tell you this is Leeds Castle parkland. And your council's own landscape assessment rates this as highly sensitive, and you have a commitment to conserve and restore this landscape and to avoid urban fringe influences extending along the A20. The council's own landscape officer states, based on revised documents and latest comments from the Forestry Commission, I do not believe the amendments are sufficient to satisfy my concerns, and I am still not able to support this application. That's your own landscape officer. The Forestry Commission have responded to state that not only are they misrepresented in the application, for it states that they have approved certain updated plans, which they deny, but that the development would require a further felling licence for more woodland to be felled on the site. The Forestry Commission have ordered the restocking of 77 trees on the site to restore it, and of course are against it. The Parish Council wish to see it refused as out of keeping with the area, and of course there is very strong objection from local neighbours for a wide range of material planning reasons. Strategically, what precedent would this set for other landowners in Maidstone to know that the council will approve on illegally felled woodland contradicting a Forestry Commission restocking notice? And I note the technicalities around that. It can only lead to more illegal felling, especially from commercial developers seeking to profit from our woodland. I ask you, balance the risk and the negative impact of this application against the benefit to the borough. Just 2 additional houses, executive homes for very wealthy people, towards your government target, when you note you already have sufficient supply for 5 years.
Thank you. I'm afraid you've exceeded your 3 minutes, but thank you
done.
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Our third speaker is the agent on behalf of the applicant, Mr. Court. I'm sure you know how the button works.
Thank you, Chairman. As you've heard, this is an application for a replacement dwelling and 2 additional dwellings within the existing curtilage of this property that fronts Firs Lane. Now, since the previous application was refused, new consultants, including myself, have been appointed, and we've sought to work with your officers in order to discuss and agree an acceptable development. We've therefore had 2 rounds of pre-application advice. On each occasion, the officer said that the principle of 3 dwellings here was acceptable, and they've also provided very useful advice on design, layout, landscaping, and on ecological enhancements. Our proposals this time, therefore, Chairman, are supported by a number of professional studies, in particular a landscape and visual assessment, an arboricultural survey, and a woodland management plan. We are, most importantly, Chairman, proposing a substantial area of woodland be properly managed and subject to replanting, along with provision of ecological and landscape enhancements. The additional planting will, I believe, address the concerns of the Forestry Commission, even though this is a non-statutory consultee. The Commission has said that it considered that some excess felling has taken place in the past. I'm informed that was between 2014 and 2018, but this is something that my clients certainly dispute. Indeed, Chairman, they've appealed against the restocking notice. That was submitted in February 2020, and they're still waiting for a decision. and we all thought planning appeals took a long time. Nevertheless, as I've said, we're proposing a substantial amount of replanting along with a woodland management plan. Now, there have been objections from neighbours, as you've heard, but as your case officer said, Chairman, these do not warrant refusal. As you've also heard, this is a sustainable location that has been accepted by a department inspector and accepted by your planning officers and colleagues since then. Chairman, approval is recommended by your officers, and therefore I hope that you and your colleagues feel able to approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Court, and well done within your 3 minutes. Thank you. We have Councillor Garton, who is going to join us virtually. Are you with us, Councillor Garton?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, members of the committee. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you, Councillor Garton. Mr. Bailey, do you wish to come back on any of those issues before I open it to the floor? No. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Right. I have Councillor Eaves and then Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chairman. I've obviously read through all this and listened intently to what was being said this evening. I've listened to the fact that there are new advisors that have been put in place since previous refusals that are now involved, and also that our own officers have recommended approval. I know that although we've got a plentiful supply of land over 5 years, it was adjusted the other day, but we've previously been advised we can't just use that on its own to refuse just because we've got a plentiful supply. I also know that there is a much higher number than usual of conditions attached that seem to seek to address the biodiversity and environmental issues, and far more than I would normally expect, but maybe that's a sign that perhaps more would be needed. And also, I'm not sitting here saying that I'm anti-development. I think in somewhere that's sustainable and right application comes in, then it needs to be considered. But I've got a few sort of major concerns with this and what I've heard and what I've read, and from looking at the location, that doesn't sit well with me. One big one is the restocking notice. That's one, and I know that on its own, I don't necessarily think that we could utilise that. You know, me having the past as a police officer, I don't like to see people just trying to get around offences that they have clearly been accused of and been taken to court, and an appeal may well be an appeal, but evidence is there to actually to deal with it. And it doesn't sit well that someone's looking to skirt around the fact that an offence was suspected. I add that term loosely to protect myself of an offence being committed. Our own landscape officer cannot accept this application as it is. That's another big thing for me. How can we go against our own landscape officer that does not wish to see this approved in its current guise? And also, I think we can refer to policy SP17 that seeks to protect against development in the countryside. 2 previous reports have actually stated, and I've underlined it, development would consolidate sporadic and urbanising development in rural landscape, causing unacceptable harm to character and appearance of the area. Can anybody here this evening, from looking at the application and what you've heard, tell me that anything that's been put forward goes against what was been refused on lesser applications, and that you'd be happy to actually approve this, vote for approval, when we've refused it for less? So, given that I think SP17 would cover a reason for refusal, I'd like to move to refuse this application on that basis.
Thank you, Councillor Eaves. You obviously have a seconder. Councillor Harwood, do you wish to speak now?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Planning, as we know, is a balancing act, essentially, and I think here the officers have given weight to some local design issues and essentially the way that this development fits in to the Furs Lane itself. I think the angle I'm coming at it from is the landscape of local value, the Lem Valley. And anybody who knows Old Mill Lane will know very well that you look across the Lem Valley where the cows are when you come along the A20 and you see into the back of Furs Lane. And Furs Lane is an urbanising feature. There's some it's rather unusual the way that sporadic development has occurred along that stretch of the A20. And historically, it's just about worked. It's not been too bad because it's tended to be smaller cottages and bungalows and so on. I think everyone must have noticed that in the last few years, things have begun to change. You've seen bigger units being built as smaller cottages and bungalows are being replaced. You've seen a lot of sit-on mowers now mowing all the edge of the A20. So when it was lovely countryside as you were coming in, now it's kind of bowling green stripes. And also there's an awful lot more lighting along there. And I think it reached its nadir when the current industrial site was being redeveloped, and the security lighting, I think, could probably be seen from space. It was like a kind of beam of light going up. However, I cannot help but think that the intensification proposed here, the size of the units, and the fact that the trees lost would not be able to be replaced because there would be buildings and gardens and hard standing there, would lead to a suburbanisation of the open countryside, and especially the protected landscape of the Lem Valley, which I think is the key concern here. And it's not just about the built form, it's also about the domestic paraphernalia that goes with this size of unit, where we know we will have lighting in gardens, we know we will have several motor cars and so on there, we know that we will have just an urbanisation. Because interestingly, the east side of Furze Lane is not very developed. The west side is where most, 80% of the development is. The east side is a block of woodland and a kind of open, rough field, most of it, what you will see across the Lem Valley. So I absolutely agree with Councillor Eves' point around a refrain of the previous refusal on this site, because I think this proposal would lead to a consolidation and an urbanising development in the on the edge of the open countryside. But I do think that we need to focus more on our local plan protection of the Lem Valley and actually underline the fact that that Furze Lane projects into open countryside and would have a disproportionately significant impact because the east side of Furze Lane is currently undeveloped. So I think I'm absolutely supporting Councillor Eves' refusal, but I think we should further emphasise some of those impacts. And I think we should actually mention that from Old Mill Lane, where you are literally looking across the area of local landscape value, you look straight into Furze Lane. I question a little bit some of the other issues that are flagged around sustainability and so on. I mean, one inspector does not make somewhere that hasn't got any public transport and you can only really get to by motor car. That's sustainable in my mind. But I think that is, debatable as to whether we could get away on the policy. And just on the last point, I think the point has been made by several of the speakers tonight. We've exceeded our housing need. It's not that we're desperate for housing and that we're I think in terms of that balancing act, this will definitely impact upon the open countryside. It will definitely further suburbanise this eastern approach to the town. So I think we should refuse and stick to our guns. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. A proposition has been made and has been seconded, but I would like to ask other councillors if they have any views to express, and I have Councillor English and then Councillor Mumford, and perhaps while they're speaking, Councillors Eves and Harwood, you might like to be thinking of what will be reasonable grounds for refusal. But let me come on to Councillor English first.
Clearly, the situation with the housing land supply doesn't mean that you automatically refuse applications just because you've got a supply. As Councillor Harwood sort of said, in essence, what you do is you look at it and see what sort of contribution it would make, and then you weigh it against other factors. What I think we're saying here is that the contribution for 2 units is not particularly substantial, and the landscape impact is significant. we have our landscape officer saying, in line with the policy SP17, which is not a blanket refusal. It has been sort of suggested this evening in one or two places that it is, but it isn't. It's a test of the impact of a development on the landscape and related features. But we have quite clearly had a refusal on grounds that I don't think have been addressed. We have advice from our landscape officer, and we have quite clearly a situation where there is significant landscape impact. But against that, we have some positive design features. But I remember the debates very well about when we were establishing areas of local landscape importance, and it was quite clear that the natural environment in these areas was particularly sensitive, and we should be taking great care and consideration about the built development that goes into them. Doesn't mean you can't have built development, but we need to consider the impact, and having considered it and weighed the relevant issues, I think it's quite clear, well, it's clear to me anyway, that the grounds for the original refusal haven't been overcome. And the fact is that sometimes, yes, you do have a lot of conditions, but when I first got involved in planning, what I was told by a grizzled old planning officer was that the more conditions you see on an application, the more you realise you might have a problematic application in front of you. And that is something that's held true over the years. This is a very problematic application. I wouldn't say you can't develop here, you probably can, but this is not in any way a sympathetic impact on the landscape, and we should be giving that priority in this particular part of the borough. That's why we have the policies that we do.
Thank you, Councillor English. Councillor Mumford, and then I'll ask Mr Bailey if he likes to come back and respond to any of the issues that you've raised.
Yeah, we've got to be very clear that we're not considering the supply of housing or restocking issues. We've got to be very clear that we are not doing that. And I believe that first paragraph fits SP17 fairly well. I'm not sure about poor design, but that fits SP17 pretty well. And also, I'm pleased to see that we're looking at an LLV and we are talking about what is in it, which is conserve and enhance, and a high priority. It makes a change for an LLV to actually get considered, and I'm quite pleased with that. The other thing is, if we looked at DM11 and it was applicable, which it's not, because it's garden development, even if we were looking at that, they look at privacy, and I'm concerned about the bungalow opposite and privacy. So I think it would even fall if it was in a built-up area and under DM11 because of privacy. And I think we should still consider that privacy of the bungalow opposite. So, yeah, I'm in full support in the direction that Councillor Eaves and Harwood wants to take it.
Thank you, Councillor Mumford. Mr Bailey, do you wish to come back and respond to Councillor's views?
I think members have been very clear in terms of where they're coming from and applying the tests, and I think giving professional advice, members have turned their minds to the tests in SP17. They've clearly identified where the harm is arising from, and it's a two-stage policy, as members will know. And also they've applied the tests in terms of point 6 of SP17 in terms of conserving and enhancing the landscape characters. So members have followed the principles of the policy, and therefore it's kind of not for me to try and dissuade members on that point, because members have followed the path that's set out by policy. It is a judgment that members have reached. They've reached the conclusion that previous grounds have not been addressed. They're rightly not taking into consideration the stocking notice and the issues that may arise from the back of that. and they're looking at the principles arising from landscape impact, principally in this countryside area and in a sensitive landscape as identified by the local plan. So I don't think it's right for me to go down on that route. Members have stuck to the guidelines as per the policy requirements, and I will advise members as and when we get to this discussion on the grounds. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. I'll have Councillor Kimmins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just quickly, it's funny, Councillor Reeves always reads my mind. I'd even written down SP17 before you even spoke, and I thought, oh, well, I haven't got to speak very much tonight. And obviously what the landscape officer said, yeah, spot on. So I just congratulate Councillor Reeves for getting it spot on. I think it's, what you said was just about right. So, so you know where I'm coming from. I'm going to support you.
Thank you, Councillor Kimmins. So we're moving towards a recommendation for refusal. Are you wishing to speak again, Councillor Reeves?
I'm just trying to make sure that I've got the right wording that would be sort of happy with under SP17. But if anyone else wants to put their 2 cents in.
Thank you, Councillor Eaves. So, reasons for refusal I think we might be looking at, I think, are going to be very similar to the first paragraph of the reasons that the previous application was refused, but I don't know whether it would be appropriate to include a reference to SP17. We haven't done that in previous applications, and perhaps Councillor Mr. Bailey can advise us.
I think it would be.
Yeah, well, certainly the previous didn't refer to it, but they should have. So in terms of a standard practice, you should refer to, I would suggest, SS1 and SP17 in your grounds of refusal. And I know Councillor Harwood has probably got some additional, because he wanted some additional wording to add in terms of how maybe the impact on the LLV is exacerbated in this particular instance, but I'll just hear what Councillor Harwood... I've got some notes written down on that. My notes say how Furze Lane projects into the open countryside, and that the current proposals would have a disproportionate impact on the countryside, causing substantial harm to the Len Valley landscape of local value, contrary to policies SS1 and SP17 of the Maidstone Borough Local Plan. In addition to that first paragraph as set out on your papers, page 11.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yes, Furze Lane projects into open countryside, and clearly this proposal, because of its scale and mass, neither conserves nor enhances the Len Valley landscape of local value. And I think that really, with all of the pointers, the kind of colloquial point that's discussed here that Mr. Bailey has already raised, I think we need to specifically talk about the Len Valley landscape of local value. I don't know whether it is also worth stating that this proposal being on the east side of Furze Lane, which is largely undeveloped, makes it even more prominent with the intensification proposed because of the open nature of that land. And also the other thing that I did wonder was Old Mill Lane is a, you know, it's a historic winding lane which hugs the edge of the Len Valley, and it goes down to, you know, the historic part of Old Leeds. And I wonder whether we should specifically talk about that, because I'd really like an inspector to stand in Old Mill Lane and look at the application site. And I don't know if we do that as an informative or how we do it, but because it does look literally across the valley. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. Councillor Mumford.
Yeah, I don't keep adding points to it, but my concern is we see it time and again, they address the points we put in. I'm still got one point, and that is the bungalow opposite and the privacy of that bungalow opposite. And I don't like keep adding extra bits, but we know they come back and address the points we have brought up. I'm just wondering whether there's anything that we can put in to protect that bungalow.
Do you want to come back on that, Mr. Mr. Bailey?
Yeah, just on your screen in front of you, in terms of, if I can zoom into the property, the speaker's property is this one I think I'm alluding to. In terms of developments that front on to a lane, it's very difficult to substantiate an argument of overlooking when traditionally properties front onto a lane either side, because that's the natural sort of grain of development, and it's a sort of an established issue. You know, whilst the existing property is set back, you can see it's, you know, it's across a lane from an existing property. And similarly, that's reflected in most properties where you've got country lanes that they front onto a lane. That's the natural grain. I would resist against a ground of refusal on those bases because, as I said, it is a natural form of development that does occur, and therefore it's quite difficult to substantiate a loss of privacy on that basis, and that would be my view. I think members, if they're going down a ground, have got arguable and substantial grounds, and in this case, and that's the firmest ground that you should go forward with.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Does anybody else wish to comment upon this application? No? Okay. Are you able to sort of read out what you scribbled down as reasons for refusal, Mr. Bailey, so councillors know what they're voting for? Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Is everybody... Oh, Councillor Harwood? Interesting point, Mr. Bailey.
I probably don't disagree with that. Would that not come into the urbanising development in the rural landscape element, that you'd sort of pick that out as it went through in terms of the assessment of the application? If members wish to refer to that in specific areas, then it could be put into there. I'd add it into the urbanising development by virtue of the increased impact in terms of both day and night arising from lighting, etc. So you could put it into that context.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Right, does everybody now have a clear idea of the reasons for refusal? In that case, it's been proposed, and secondly, can I ask for votes in favour of that proposal? Sorry.
Sorry, we've just had a message that maybe the reasons for refusal didn't come out clearly on the webcast. So if we could just do a quick recap on that, please.
Sorry, by virtue of its impact on the day and night of the rural landscape, causing unacceptable harm to the character and appearance in the area, and this inappropriate development of garden land would represent poor design and would represent poor design, and by virtue of Furze Lane projecting into open countryside, by virtue of its scale and mass of the proposals, would have a disproportionate impact on the Len Valley landscape of local value, which fails to conserve and enhance this landscape of local importance, contrary to policies SS1 and SP17 of the Maidstone Local Plan Review. And I also asked for delegated authority to amend that condition to include, that wording, to include a review of short, medium-term views from Old Mill Lane to see whether that further harms the Len Valley landscape character.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey, and well done. Thank you. Right, back to where we were. Members, can I please have votes in favour of supporting the proposition? Would you like to read out the... And any votes against? So that has been carried. Thank you, members. We will just sit quietly for a few minutes and allow people to leave if they want to. Thank you, James. Right. Okay. Okay, members, can we now move on to item 14 on the agenda, which is 3 Ashes, Boxley Road, Wallersley, Chatham, Kent. And I will ask Ms. Miller to present the case to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an outline application at Boxley Road for residential development. Only access is sought for this application. A previous application for an eco house was granted on this site in 2009. If I can point out, the ancient woodland is in this area. This is a long lane, and then down here it is a blanket TPO of trees as Boxley Road runs here. Okay, so the proposed development is to be sited here. Now, previous policies relating to special landscape area no longer apply within this current local plan. The majority of concerns raised with regard to the application relate to the loss of trees on the site in 2007. So you can see that the site is fairly clear. There are 2 TPO trees here. So that's views of the access of the site. This is the site viewed from the road. And what I'm looking at, if I can show you the application site is set forward to make sure that the development doesn't encroach on the buffer zone of the ancient woodland here. On this location plan, you can see the TPO trees are marked here. And then you've got this block here is the limit of building area. So you can see it's well clear of these TPO trees and the ancient woodland here. You've got an area for parking and turning at the front of the site. No garaging, just the hard standing. Sorry. Sorry, I beg your pardon, the photos are in different order to what I'd done. So conditions relating to biodiversity, trees and landscape would be important in this particular area. So we're looking to, because a lot of the trees were lost back in 2007, we're looking to upgrade the site as part of the development to basically take advantage of the opportunity to improve the character of the locality. So, as I say, trees and landscape conditions, biodiversity, along with site levels to ensure the height of the building doesn't impede on views of the landscaping through to the rear of the site. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. We have 4 speakers for this application. We have Mr. Chapman. Is Mr. Chapman? Oh, he's speaking to us remotely. Are you with us, Mr. Chapman?
I am. I'm not sure if you can see this. Let me turn my sound off.
Sorry, I couldn't really
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, yes. Thank you, Mr. Chapman, and well done within your 3 minutes. We have a second public speaker, Mr. Crane, who's also speaking to us remotely. Are you with us, Mr. Crane? Can we hear you?
Hello? Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, right. You have 3 minutes, starting from when you start. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. My objection is very simple to Mr. Chapman's, in that the current plan doesn't show the extent of the woodland. If you'd seen what this slot was like back in 2005, that it was complete dense woodland right to the very front of the boundary, complete dense woodland. As Mr. Chapman said, in 2017, the buyer of this plot of land that was sold by the council was illegally demolished. So all the woodland was demolished over a bank holiday weekend. So my question to the council is this: if woodland covered by a blanket TPO is illegally bulldozed in this way, does it cease to be protected by the TPO and development permitted? Or is it still protected by the TPO and should be allowed to regenerate? So if the council approves this application, I assume they are confirming that illegally demolishing protected woodland is unopposed in the context of residential development applications, and they also accept that further acts of this kind will be encouraged. As a side note, this might actually be good news to me, as I have an interest in 3 blocks to the land adjacent to my property, also protected by Woodlands TPO, and therefore, with tongue-in-cheek, I ask the council if I can take the same approach and demolish those woodlands, and any future residential planning application would be unopposed in principle. I urge the planning committee to look at the before and after photos supplied by Mr. Chapman, clearly showing this development is being proposed on protected woodland, even though it currently appears otherwise. In summary, if this application is approved, it completely undermines the legal protection afforded by TPOs, and we wouldn't be sitting here today but for the illegal demolition of this protected woodland. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crane, and well within your 3 minutes. Thank you very much. We have a Mr. Nichols for the applicant, who is also joining us remotely. I don't know whether you can hear me, but we'd like to hear you. Mr. Nichols? Hello, yes, we can hear you, and you have 3 minutes from when you begin.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Nichols. We have one visiting member, Councillor Bob Hinder. Are you with us, Bob? Councillor Hinder?
He's just dropped out, so we can give him a minute and see if he comes back.
Okay, we'll just give Councillor Hinder a minute to, apparently he's lost connectivity. Occupational hazard. Sorry? How long should we give him? It is important that he speaks.
Mr. Chairman,
Councillor Brindle?
I've just heard from Councillor Hinder. He's been thrown out completely and he can't get back in. He apologises and will have to withdraw.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Brindle, for letting us know that. It is important that visiting members do speak before the debate is opened up to other members, but if Councillor Hinder cannot come in and cannot get back in, we will proceed without his comments. I'd like to ask Ms Miller if she'd like to come back on some of the issues raised by some of the speakers, in particular the relevance of the old TPOs where the trees were felled 14, 15 years ago, and if you could just cover that, I'd be very, very grateful. Thank you.
With regard to the loss of the trees, that was done back in 2007. Obviously, the land has since changed hands. I think it's obviously because it's a long time ago. We are where we are with the way the land is now, but I would say that the proposed development does allow us the opportunity to put in a good planting scheme and try to renovate that area so that it's more in line with the locality. And I think that's really all I can.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey.
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman. I think on the basis of, in terms of where the previous speaker, we wouldn't be able to take any action against the current owner on that basis, principally because he, from my understanding, is not the one that carried out the works of the tree, so you couldn't seek to prosecute someone on that basis, especially given the length of time. And notwithstanding that, it would be unreasonable to us to serve a replanting notice, which is what you would do in the event of not prosecuting someone, given the length of time that has elapsed since that occurrence occurred in 2007 to current day. So in terms of where we are, the officer is totally right that, you know, there wouldn't be any action or reasonable action that would be proportionate and in the public interest to replant those as part of some formal notice. So we just have to accept the site is as it is, because you should have taken action at the time if you were going to take action. So I would kind of endorse what the officer said in terms of if you want to stipulate, now is an opportunity if you are minded to approve. You have an outline application, you're not considering landscaping, but you could actually specify in an informative, if you so wished, exactly the detail that you would like to come forward as part of any landscaping scheme, that, you know, that would be informed by a future reserve matters application. And you've also got the ability to limit numbers if you so minded to do that on this application, to set the parameters, because at the moment it's kind of quite open, and members would also have that opportunity to control the parameter as part of this scheme were they so minded. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. That was very, very helpful. Open it now to members of the committee. Councillor Harwood, I think you put your hand up first.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, with respect to the officer's point, tree preservation orders don't lapse because land has changed hands. And there are many, many sites where, certainly I've been trying to get TPO trees replaced for many, many years, and there's always a reason why they can't be at that time. And I do struggle a little bit with, oh, well, that was then, and therefore you don't need to replace the trees. I understood that TPO legislation was very, very strong, and you literally had to get a judicial review to overturn TPOs on site. So I understand that this is a blanket TPO, and certainly they're a little bit weaker than individual TPOs. But what I strongly suggest is if any development is approved on this site and a detailed landscaping scheme is agreed, that those trees should be TPO'd almost as soon as they go in, because of the sloping land and because of the importance of this area buffering ancient woodland. So essentially we re-establish the TPO, and I think that's probably the way to do it. And where Mr. Bailey described you know, different ways of doing it, I think that probably we could enhance this landscape instead of going with the very closely planted plantation woodland that you've still got, albeit ancient, on the higher land. If we were to request a kind of wood pasture, more kind of open woodland with bigger parkland trees, so it's more like a, if you think about it, a forest in northern France, a kind of fairy tale forest with really big trees in it, with flowery glades and so on. That's what we should be seeking to restore, rather than a lot of closely planted chestnut with the odd oak and hazel as it was. So that is my suggestion. On the point that Mr. Bailey makes around parameters going forward, I'd like really some more kind of, what does he mean that we've got an application here and it's means of access and they're proposing a development, that we can put limitations on so that we don't get a further development. So we're almost taking away permitted development rights. I didn't quite understand what we mean by getting control over the site. And the only other issue I'd pick up is, perhaps I'm missing it, and perhaps it's in, I don't know, with the design, but I can't see any renewable energy policy attached to the recommendation as it currently is, which I think in a development in a location such as this, we should be, just as we were on the previous application that we just refused, where there was a renewables policy. I'll just leave it at that point. Thank you.
Given that the previous application that was approved on this site was approved at least in part because of its ecological value, that's what the planning history says anyway, it seems to be perfectly reasonable to actually take the viewpoint. Let's look at this in general principles. This is an application that is controversial, and we should be getting a good quality. If we're going to approve this in a controversial location, we should be looking at a good quality application, which is not just, your bog standard. It's got to be a good design, it's got to relate well to the countryside, and we need to get a restoration, as Councillor Harwood has referred to, of the landscape quality here, and we've got to put safeguards in relation to that. So that all says that we need to actually be as tight as we can if we are going to grant consent on the application in terms of what parameters we're setting, and set a high bar, high threshold, whatever cliche we want to use this week, in terms of what we're asking for on this site, because otherwise we're just making a rod for our own backs if we just say, oh, any old rubbish will do because, you know, the site's changed over the last few years and there aren't any trees here anymore. We've got to do better than that. But the legislation and planning regulations don't actually say that we should chuck out all our considerations just because of this. Otherwise, as some of the speakers have said, we're essentially saying, okay, do what you like and give it a couple of years, few years, and the council will approve it. So I think we need to actually be quite prescriptive here.
Thank you, Councillor English. So what you're asking for really is if the committee is motivated to approve this application, you'd be looking for some informatives requiring a very high standard of design and very high standard of landscaping and tree planting.
I think Councillor Harwood essentially set out a lot of what we need to do, but I think we need to just make it absolutely crystal clear that yes, you can have a development. That's probably the only way of sorting these issues out, but it's got to be the right development.
Yep, I understand. Thank you, Councillor English. Councillor Mumford.
Right, by way of that, I've looked at it. I think it's to save this sprawling into a mass, I'd like to restrict it to one residential dwelling. I would like a condition in there that the heating system is either ground or air source heat, or conversely, no fossil fuel. I'd like to see, in line with the emerging SPD, that we are looking for a 20% net biodiversity gain. I see we've got EVs in there. I would like us to say, the same as Councillor Harwood's pointed out, renewables. I would like to see a condition on renewables. Under the external lighting, I would like to prohibit LED and the use of red light. It's the same, it looks the same, it's not red light, but it's more nature friendly. Under condition 10, if we're going for it on page 46 where it runs over the top line there, where it says at least one integrated method of design appearance in structure, and it goes on to say swift tube, back tubes, bees. I would like the word one, at least one, taken out. Otherwise we're only going to get one back tube and no swift bricks, etc. So I'd like to see that amended. Yeah, I'll go back to the officers.
Thank you, Councillor Mumford. I mean, the application is for residential development. I think it might be some difficulty with saying that no more than one, but I'll leave that to you to comment on.
Just in answer to Councillor Harwood's comments on how many dwellings, we were, or Mr. Bailey was saying that we could add a condition limiting the number of dwellings that would be proposed for the site. So when the reserve matters come in, they can go for example, no more than 2 dwellings. That was I believe, the suggestion that Mr. Bailey was making, just to clarify. Sorry, can I just ask that, so at least one bat box, is that what you were saying, Councillor Mumford?
Mr Bailey.
Yeah, thank you. There were just some other bits that I was going to sort of pick up on there. Councillor Mumford referred to a 20% biodiversity gain. That means you'd be giving too much weight to our Regulation 19 proposal at this stage, so I would advise against it. But obviously MPPF policy is clear about achieving a net gain in biodiversity, so that is perfectly reasonable to impose, and case law establishes that that's what we should be working to now in any event, but we just couldn't apply a 20%. I don't think I could recommend that you did that. The external lighting that you raised in terms of the red lighting, I think you mentioned, perfectly acceptable. The renewable energy policies, I think that's perfectly acceptable, and Councillor Harwood's informative on landscaping. I do think the issue of just one dwelling, members sort of have to look in the context. On this plan, you do have the sort of developable area that's being shown. It's quite an extensive plot, and looking at the plots immediately to the northeast and southeast, sorry, northwest and southeast, you would say that it is almost double the size of those units. My suggestion would be no more than 2 dwellings on that site. You know, the officer has restricted the height as well, so we're looking at single-storey dwellings to retain views to the woodland to the back as well. They obviously take a bigger footprint, so I certainly think that certainly no more to give you that control is something that I would suggest as well.
So I think I would agree too, but Councillor Mumford?
Yeah, the only point that you didn't cover was the heating, whether we could insist that it's not fossil fuel. And I believe that the DEFRA biodiversity gain at 10% is now far enough as being emerging policy that we could go for that figure of 10% on the DEFRA one.
Yeah, the DEFRA matrix is being rolled out, certainly, that is correct. And it is being rolled out, and lots of councils are using it in terms of a 10% net gain. It is the first one you would have in the borough that's putting a specific requirement that I'm aware of in terms of a 10% net gain. As I said, it's not formal policy, but it is something that's rolled out in the MPPG, and it's what the MPPG is advising councils to look at and use the model of the DEFRA matrix. So that's up to members whether they wish to sort of push boundaries on that level in terms of 10%. As I said, I haven't heard it being done in the borough yet, but that's down to members if they wish to push that. There is evidence to justify that element. I think in terms of a condition looking at alternatives in terms of air source, ground source, heat pumps for renewables, I think that's, again, reasonable on that basis. I think it's good not to specify and just maybe give examples such as, and word the condition to that effect. It gives a degree of flexibility for the applicant to come forward.
Thank you, Mr Bailey. Councillor Eaves?
Yeah, just a very quick one. I fully support what Councillor Mumford said, and there's always going to be the first one of everything. So why not make this one the first one and let this one be the trailblazer that we follow from here on in?
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. Are there any other comments from any other members? Oh, Councillor Harwood again, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. The point around the higher part of this site being a transition into the woodland, and where we were looking to say more open structured like wood pasture, rather than be tied too much to the landscape character assessment guidance, I think probably we should recommend that the trees used include lime, oak, beech, wild cherry and common hawthorn. I think that that's what should be there. So I think we should state that, and that we are looking to have kind of rough grass, kind of flowery grassland underneath those new trees. And I'm also interested in this point about, can we rehabilitate the TPO? So once these, well, I don't know if it's an informative or it's a kind of note to our own landscape manager, but that once this scheme does become detailed and we get those kind of decent parkland type trees back in there, that we can place a TPO on them, because I absolutely agree with the local residents that that rising land and the fingers of trees coming down between the sporadic development is what makes that stretch of Boxley Road really feel still quite rural.
I think that's all excellent points you're raising there, Councillor Harwood. But I don't know the mechanics of actually putting a TPO on trees which are part of a landscaping condition on a planning application. I mean, presumably it can just be done.
Yes, we have done it before, but I think what I would suggest in this instance, because it is a blanket woodland TPO, I think what you'd need to do is revisit that woodland and that TPO order in the future following the implementation of this scheme and the replanting scheme being carried out, and then you would then effectively go for an individual TPO, because that blanket woodland doesn't really serve a purpose after a certain while. It does serve a purpose to protect, but it needs to be more specific to carry further weight. So I would suggest that there's an informative added to this scheme, you know, covering those matters, that following implementation and the replanting scheme that takes place, the woodland TPO order gets revisited and includes the new planting to become a site-specific TPO order. Okay. Yeah, and we can put a flag on our system to enable that to occur.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. I'm very grateful for that explanation. We seem to be moving towards perhaps making a resolution to approve this application, but nobody has actually put forward a motion yet.
Can I move with the conditions that have been noted by the officers that we approve?
Okay, so it's proposed by Councillor Mumford, seconded. Do you wish to say anything more?
Oh no, I think it's been covered, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ing. Ms. Miller, did you manage to make a list of all the extra conditions? Yes. Do you just want to sort of reel them out so everybody knows exactly what we're voting for? Just a quick...
Okay, so I've made a note of the different trees involved as per Councillor Harwood's request: common hawthorn, wild cherry, lime, oak, beech, with rough grass in between. We will add renewables, and we are going to edit the biodiversity condition relating to the bat boxes. Renewables, yeah, we're leaving the ground and air source heat pumps, etc., as an open on renewables to allow them to move that forward. In terms of the 20%, we're just leaving that as a net gain. It is 10%, is it? I beg your pardon. 10% net gain for biodiversity. Was there a condition on limiting the development to 2 dwellings in the end? Yes, well, so we'll be adding that. And then an informative covering following the planting of the trees, TPOs to be revisited, so new ones can be applied. Oh, external lighting, you're right, to exclude the red lighting, yeah.
Sorry, that's the favour red lighting over red lighting is all wildlife friendly. I mean, LEDs you can use red light and you just got filters on.
Okay, thank you.
I think there's also a high standard of design and materials.
Okay.
Okay. Right. Councillor Mumford.
someone didn't want me to speak. Yeah, just clarify what was said about ground and air source. What I think we concluded that we would exclude fossil fuel with the suggestion of ground or air source. Just to clarify that.
Right, I think we're all... Oh.
Oh, thank you. Did you also say single-storey dwellings? Can we say that? It's done. Okay.
Well, it says height of 4.5 metres. If you go to condition 3,
Okay.
and it says details shall show woodland development within the local area with no building over a total of height of 4.5 metres.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, I think in terms of what I'm trying to say is in terms of visually, there is already a parameter that says it shall not exceed 4.5 metres. I think what the officer is referring to, it doesn't stop anyone going below ground level, but the reality on that basis is that it's, you know, the whole point of the condition is to allow views over to the site to retain the openness. So if that were to occur, you know, that's not in terms of a problem in terms of parameters because it still retains that low level height of building. So that's all I'm saying, that's already in there.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Can I now have votes in favour of the proposition? And any votes against? And no abstentions. So that has been carried, members. Thank you very much. Thank you, Joss. Right, the next item on the agenda, item number, where are we? Item number 15 is a starred item. Does any member wish to speak on this item or disagree with the recommendation?
I'm happy with the recommendation.
Okay, so I'm happy to move from the chair that we approve the application as per the order papers.
Seconded.
Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor English. Votes in favour? Votes against. Thank you very much. Thank you, members. And thank you, Mr. Blythe. Thank you. Thank you for turning up. Yes. Or someone's got to pay for it. Okay. Right. Just like to say that Councillor Mumford is having to leave, and you can. Where are we now? Oh, Surrenden Road. Right, I'll just give a couple of minutes. Councillor Mumford is having to leave the meeting for various reasons. Okay, members. Item number 13 on the agenda, which is 49 Surrenden Road, Staplehurst. And I know Councillor English always considers Staplehurst to be the centre of the universe. Well, I keep telling him that it isn't, it's Bearsted, but there we are. Right, can I call upon Mr. Bailey, please, to present the report? Thank you.
Thank you, members. I'll be as short and as concise as I possibly can be with this application. I've lost a piece of paper. Right, so this is an application for conversion of the garage into habitable space, erection of a single-storey front, two-storey side extension, and first floor side and rear extension, and it includes internal alterations. So this is the existing site location plan. Effectively, there is a wraparound single-storey extension. I've got limited photographs, unfortunately, members, on this proposal, but I will show you in terms of the street scene, which is a rather outdated street scene, but I will show you in context. Just worth drawing to your attention's numbers 47, which is this property here, because the extension does extend right up to the boundary, up to approximately this position here. However, it doesn't create a terracing effect given the way that the estate is laid out and how number 47 effectively turns the corner, because you still retain this intervening gap, so it doesn't fail the SPD policy, which seeks to retain a minimum of 3 metres gaps between properties where there is a character in the street scene of gaps, and there certainly is a character in the street scene of gaps in these properties, but it doesn't fail that SPD policy for this specific reason. So this is turning to the proposal. In effect, on plan form, you've got the 2-storey extension running along here, with effectively the first floor extension in this area, and this is a flat roofed area of the existing flat roof extension. So in terms of, you can see there's a distance here of approximately 12.8 metres to the boundary, but you will already see there is a fair degree of overlooking from the existing properties surrounding the site, because they've all got fairly similar garden sizes, etc. So there already is a degree of overlooking from the various first floor elements into adjoining, you can see across here, in terms of areas looking from this property across to here. So there already is that degree of overlooking from properties. Concern has been raised from number 43, and I'll show you a photograph of that in a minute, regarding the impact of principally this first floor extension to the rear and how it overlooks the rear garden of this property. However, as set out in the officer's report, given the intervening distance between the 12.8 metres and given the degree of overlooking that already exists, it is considered that it wouldn't be a sustainable ground to refuse an application on overlooking with this proposal. So this is looking at the application. Amended plans were received subsequent to the initial application, which have ineffectively stepped in the extension, which you can just see that here, and made it more subservient to the host dwelling, so that effectively you've got a lower ridge line, and it steps in on first floor level, which you can more clearly see on this element here. So that makes the extension subservient, and that's how it complies now with the SPD guidelines. In terms of the rear extension, as you can see, there's no impact on the adjoining property, which is 51, in terms of being overbearing, because the flat roof of the existing flat roof is retained, and you can see this is the first floor element to the rear, which is this area here. There is no side overlooking in terms of to number 51 or to number 47, because they're effectively parallel to each other, and I've already set out the concerns raised by number 43. This proposal seeks to add an additional 2 bedrooms onto the side in the extension, and obviously create some additional space in this area here, principally to the front and the conversion of the existing garage. So this is the view looking towards the property from number 43, looking to the garden area, and in effect what the proposals seek to achieve would be the additional first floor extension above, so it would be extended across this area up here, and it would extend out. It wouldn't extend out any further than the existing ground floor extension, so it's effectively just sitting above that ground floor extension. But again, as I said, there would be windows looking across this area. However, in terms of the view, you've got a bedroom window here already from the existing property that can afford those views already. You've got a bathroom window, and similarly, you know, you've got that window looking down into the adjacent property, and similarly, this window looking down into this property. So, as I said, there already is a degree of overlooking due to the nature and layout of the plot. I think that's all I have to say on the matter. As I said, the application has been amended in order to address some of the concerns in terms of the subservience, and the application is now recommended for approval, subject to those conditions as set out in your report. Thank you, Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. We have one public speaker, Mr. Coveney, an objector. Are you with us? Can you hear us?
Yes. Hello?
Yes. Yes, we can hear you. Yes. You have 3 minutes from when you start.
Okay.
Hello, we seem to have lost you, Mr. Coveney. Hello?
Hello, I'm back.
Hello, we can hear you now. Would you like to carry on?
I don't know whereabouts I got to, but I'll start from the second paragraph.
Okay.
At a distance of 11 metres from my house, all my brick windows will have removed their views, built by a brick wall instead of supplying nearby rooms. This will mean a loss of anything from 50 to 100% of sky from all my 5 vertical windows already overshadowed by their woodly aspect. If this were merely a hedge, I would have the legal right to ask the council to
Thank you, Mr. Coveney, and well done within your 3 minutes. We have no other public speakers. I don't know whether Mr. Bailey wishes to come back on any of the issues raised. If not, I'll put the item out to members. Okay. Oh, okay, Mr. Bailey.
Yeah, although the sound was particularly difficult to hear from the speaker, Issues were raised in terms of Party Wall Act. Obviously, members will know that Party Wall Act is not a consideration for you tonight. There is separate legislations under the Party Wall Act which the various parties would have to negotiate between themselves individually, and they can appoint party wall surveyors, etc. So that's not a consideration. All we need to do tonight is you know, have the correct notices been served, etc. And in this instance, my understanding is that you know, the correct issues have been served in terms of the notification letters. So that's all that members would need to consider tonight, not party wall matters. And I think there was issue raised to some issues on the covenants or something. That's why I was going through. Again, that's not a matter for members to consider tonight. That's outside the planning considerations. So members really just need to consider, you know, is it compliant with policy, the SPD, as set out in your committee papers. In front of you there is a photograph, unfortunately. Sorry, this is a rather ancient photograph. It's dated 2009, but the principle of the property, as you didn't see, the front elevation doesn't change, but obviously there may be some slight difference in characteristics. So thank you, members.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Councillor Perry, local ward member.
Thank you, Chairman. It's always difficult because it's a bit of a balancing act. And I am a parish councillor as well, but I don't sit on the planning committee. So, and I read my parish council's recommendation to refuse. But I actually, when I read it, and I know the property quite well, and I know the area very, very well, I think the applicant has made every effort to meet the conditions and to take the advice that's been given. And I don't think the street scene is really an issue here because there are a lot of extensions in that road and in the area actually. And I don't think this is a lot different from many, many others, to be perfectly honest. I think, and I read the report very carefully, and it's a very good and straightforward report. I think it's very clear. I don't think, I actually think the DM9 issues and the subservience issues have been addressed. I do think that. I accept, you know, there's always going to be issues about loss and overlooking, but this is, in practice, this extension is not a lot different from a lot of the other extensions in the area. And the parish council have raised very important points, but I think it doesn't fail the SPD policy. I think Mr. Bailey is absolutely right on that. And as I said before, I don't think it's no longer dominating the current building. So on those grounds, I don't really think we're in a very strong, if we were minded to refuse, I don't think we've got a very strong planning reasons to do so, to be realistic about it. And I think, so from my point of view, though I understand where the parish council have come from, and they've looked at it very carefully and done it very professionally, but I think things have moved on slightly. And I think, as I said, I think if you read the paper, it's very clear that it meets all the objections. And so I have no problem with approving this. And I'll be perfectly honest, I would be happy to propose that it's approved, if anybody was prepared to second it.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. Are you, Councillor English? Do you want to speak now?
Yeah, I've looked at this very carefully. I don't 100% like it, but I'm struggling to see that we could sustain a refusal here. It's unexceptional, maybe a little banal, but you know, if we turned down everything that was a little banal and bland, we'd be having an awful lot to do, wouldn't we? But I just don't think we'd get anywhere with an argument for refusal here. I understand the parish council and the neighbour objections, and unfortunately planning law doesn't give them a remedy here, and the other issues that were raised, important though they are to people, are not something within the purview of issues that we can consider. So there we are. So with no great enthusiasm, no greater than yours, Councillor Perry, I suggest I support what you're saying.
Thank you, Councillor English. Councillor Harwood.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think design is important, and I think as a committee we need to ensure that we do get some betterment. The residential extensions SPD, it actually has quite a strong policy in there about seeking renewables within extensions, and for a long time it's only been extensions where we've been able to actually have a policy hook to achieve renewable energy generation. And because this is quite a significant extension in terms of area, I think we should be utilising the renewables element of the SPD. If colleagues are willing to take that on board. And the only other issue I had was just around, we're agreeing a set of plans and drawings. When I was looking at them, I couldn't really see whether the materials palette was going to ensure that they were matching properly in terms of the brick and tile and everything. And I just wonder if Mr. Bailey thinks we need to pin that down precisely because of the scale and because of the fact that the extensions are almost on every flank somewhere. We could end up with a kind of donut roof. So any thoughts on that? Thank you.
Mr. Bailey.
Yeah, the details, the proposed details are set out in the application form, which effectively do say that they match the existing, but if members feel that they need to put that in further detail, I think it's condition 3, that's where it's referring specified in the application. They are actually set out clearly in the application form. I can have a look for you if you wish for specifically what they say, if you wish.
So how do we stand with renewables? It's a very, very big extension.
I think if members feel on that basis, that's a condition that can meet the tests. We've done that on numerous extensions prior, so yeah.
Happy with that? Right, okay, well, we have had a proposal, we've had a seconder. Does anybody else wish to speak on the application? No? Okay, in that case, can I have votes in favour of approving the application as per the papers with the amended to the conditions?
That's 12, Chairman.
No abstentions, so that is carried. Thank you, members. Item 60, which is the appeal decisions. Do you have any words of wisdom for us, Mr. Bailey?
Just the one you would have noticed, the first one appearing on the list again. This is the second time. It's not. This is the one where I said to members that officers went back to the planning inspectorate that they'd referred in their decision notice to a lack of a 5-year supply, so we didn't want that to stand in the decision notice and for agents to refer back to that. So we asked the inspectorate to correct an error, which we're allowed to do in terms of minor errors. And the inspector then reissued the decision notice again with the removal of the 5-year supply. Appreciate the decision wasn't to the recommendations that this committee gave. Notwithstanding that, we did review it, but didn't consider there were grounds there to challenge that decision. So that's all I've got. The others to just, I've got nothing further to add on the other.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Well, we're all human, and inspectors can make mistakes and make omissions and things. Thank you very much. I think that is the end of the agenda. Oh, sorry. Do you want? Oh, sorry, Councillor Perry.
Apologies, Chairman, I wasn't.
Sorry,
No, I just wanted to quickly just come back to the first item. I wrote to our MP, and she took the matter up with Robert Jenrick, who's no longer in the job. But anyway, I did get a letter back, and it was a typical civil service response, which, Chairman, you know as well as I do what that means. But then I got today, and this is why I wanted the floor, I got a letter from the Planning Inspectorate, and they actually do make an apology because they ignored one of our neighbourhood plan policies, PW4, which is quite important policy, and they admit that the inspector ignored it and was at fault in doing that. But then they go on to say that they still think they were right. So it's a typical response again. But nevertheless, they did admit that there were problems with this appeal, and I just wanted, I've given you a copy, so
yes, thank you.
I'm happy for members, obviously, for it to be distributed at some time. But I just wanted to just update you on that. I don't think we can go much further with it, but it's, you know, we've done our best on it. And thank you to Mr. Bailey for pursuing it as well. It's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Councillor Perry. Right, I think that concludes the business for this evening, members. Thank you very much. Thank you for your endurance. Thank you for your comments. Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Thank you, Jocelyn. And to Debbie, thank you very much. And bid you all a good evening.